Respect rarely begins where approval is chased. Many men feel the quiet fatigue of adjusting their words, softening their edges, rehearsing reactions before entering a room. You sense something slipping each time you trade honesty for comfort, yet you call it diplomacy. That tension is not social failure. It is friction between who you are and who you perform. Likability offers warmth without weight. Respect demands something colder and far more durable. Lesson 1. Stop trying to be liked. Be respected begins with understanding that approval feels safe because it asks very little of you. A man who seeks likability learns to read rooms before he reads himself. He measures tone, adjusts posture, edits opinions mid-sentence. At first, this looks like intelligence. People smile. Conversations remain smooth. Conflict disappears. Yet something else disappears with it. Weight. Likability rewards the absence of friction. Respect observes how you carry it. You notice the difference in ordinary moments. A colleague interrupts you and you laugh it off. A friend makes a careless remark and you ignore it to keep harmony. Someone adds more work to your plate because you handle things well. None of these moments feel dramatic. That is why they accumulate unnoticed. Each small concession teaches others how far they may step without resistance. History has already tested this pattern. When a man negotiates every boundary to remain pleasant, others stop asking where the boundary is. The trap is subtle because kindness and compliance often wear the same face. You tell yourself you are being patient, mature, easygoing, but patience without limits becomes permission. People do not consciously decide to respect or dismiss you. They observe repetition. If you never defend your time, your words, or your standards, they conclude those things have little value even to you. Why does likability feel so necessary? Because rejection exposes uncertainty. Silence after disagreement feels heavier than forced laughter. Many men rush to repair tension the moment it appears. They explain too much, apologize too quickly, add humor where firmness would suffice. The room relaxes, but authority leaves quietly through another door. Respect grows differently. It often begins with discomfort, a pause that lasts longer than expected, a refusal delivered without anger, a sentence spoken without decoration. You notice people recalibrating around you, sometimes confused, sometimes resistant. Approval decreases before regard appears. This is the toll most avoid paying. Silence is not absence, it is selection. Consider the man who does not rush to respond when challenged, not because he lacks words, but because he refuses to compete for emotional space. Noise seeks validation. Control waits. Others begin to measure themselves against that stillness. Conversations slow, interruptions decrease, not through dominance, but through certainty. Being respected does not require hardness, it requires consistency. You remain polite, yet unavailable for manipulation, calm, yet unwilling to dilute truth for comfort. Some will call this distance. Others will call it confidence. Both reactions reveal the same thing. You are no longer arranging yourself to be easily consumed. The second truth, stop trying to be liked, be respected, demands that you understand the price of emotional availability without restraint. Many men believe openness automatically earns trust. They share quickly, explain motives, soften disagreements, reveal frustrations in an effort to appear sincere. It feels honest. It feels human. Yet uncontrolled transparency often removes the very tension that creates regard. People rarely value what arrives without effort. Watch what happens in everyday exchanges. Someone complains, and you immediately sympathize. Someone asks for your opinion, and you deliver it carefully wrapped so no one feels challenged. Someone crosses a line, and instead of addressing it directly, you explain why it bothered you, hoping understanding will replace consequence. The conversation remains pleasant. Nothing breaks. but nothing changes either. Emotional accessibility becomes a silent invitation. Others learn they can unload without reciprocating. They assume explanations will always replace boundaries. Over time, you become useful, agreeable, dependable, yet strangely invisible when decisions are made. Time has proven this pattern repeatedly. Authority does not grow from being understood. It grows from being measured. The mistake lies in confusing warmth with credibility. Warmth attracts attention. Credibility holds it. When every reaction is available on demand, others stop wondering what you truly think. Mystery disappears. Anticipation disappears. Without tension, your presence carries little gravity. Consider the workplace meeting where everyone speaks at once. One man fills silence with reassurance, jokes, constant commentary. Another listens longer than comfort allows. When he finally speaks, the room adjusts instinctively. Why? Because restraint signals control. Words that arrive rarely must carry intention. Restraint does not mean emotional coldness. It means emotional ownership. Many rush to clarify themselves when misunderstood. They fear distance. They fear being seen as harsh. So, they overcorrect. They add context, soften tone, apologize for firmness before firmness even exists. Each explanation reduces consequence. Others learn that pressure will always produce accommodation. Ask yourself, when did you last allow discomfort to remain unanswered? Respect often emerges the moment you stop rescuing others from tension. Someone reacts poorly to a boundary. You do not argue. You do not persuade. You allow their reaction to belong to them. Silence expands between you. In that space, perception reorganizes. One sentence delivered calmly can outweigh an hour of emotional negotiation. There is a difference between being known and being available. When everything about you is immediately accessible, there is nothing left to discover. Respect requires distance enough for others to encounter you rather than consume you, and many will resist that distance at first because it removes the familiar comfort of easy access. The third principle, stop trying to be liked, be respected, requires recognizing how constant agreement slowly dissolves authority. Agreement feels efficient. It prevents friction, shortens conversations, avoids the awkward pause that follows disagreement. Many men learn early that harmony earns acceptance. They nod, adapt, accommodate. Over time, this becomes instinct. You agree before you even examine what was said. At first, nothing appears lost. People describe you as easy to work with, reasonable, cooperative. Doors remain open. But respect does not measure convenience. It measures resistance. When you agree too easily, others stop testing the strength of your thinking. Your presence becomes predictable. You are consulted for confirmation, not judgment. Decisions form around louder voices because disagreement signals investment. Silence signals surrender, even when that silence feels polite from the inside. History has already shown that influence belongs to those willing to interrupt momentum when necessary, not loudly, not emotionally, simply, firmly. Consider the meeting where an idea moves forward despite obvious flaws. You notice them immediately. The timeline is unrealistic, the risk unnecessary. Yet, you hesitate. You calculate reactions. You imagine appearing difficult. So, you soften your concern. You phrase it as a suggestion instead of a position. Someone else dismisses it quickly. The room continues. Later, when problems emerge, people wonder why no one spoke clearly. Agreement protected comfort. It sacrificed credibility. Respect forms when others understand that your approval has weight because it is not automatic. A man who rarely objects but does so without hesitation changes the temperature of a conversation. People listen differently. Not because he dominates, but because he refuses to participate dishonestly. Agreement without conviction becomes noise. Many fear disagreement because they associate it with conflict, raised voices, broken relationships. But disagreement delivered calmly does the opposite. It introduces structure. It reveals standards. It tells others there is a line between cooperation and surrender. Notice how quickly people recalibrate when you say, "I don't agree," without apology. No long explanation, no defensive tone, just clarity. Some will push back. Some will test whether firmness collapses under pressure. If you retreat immediately, the lesson is learned. Resistance is temporary. If you remain calm, something shifts. Even those who dislike the answer begin to measure you differently. Respect rarely feels comfortable in the moment it is earned. There is also a private cost to constant agreement. Each time you deny your own judgment, tension accumulates quietly. Resentment appears where honesty should have lived. You begin avoiding conversations altogether because participation feels dishonest. Likability survives. Self-respect erodes. A man who agrees with everything eventually stands for nothing recognizable. You do not need confrontation to refuse agreement. Often, the strongest refusal is simple presence, listening fully, waiting, then offering a sentence that does not bend to expectation. The room may cool. Someone may laugh nervously. That discomfort reveals something important. Approval depended on compliance. And once compliance disappears, people must decide whether they value truth more than ease. The fourth truth: stop trying to be liked. Be respected demands that you understand the difference between being approachable and being accessible. Many men confuse the two because both appear friendly from the outside. They believe openness creates connection, that constant availability proves strength of character. Yet accessibility without limits quietly removes consequence from how others treat you. Approachability invites conversation. Accessibility invites intrusion. You recognize this pattern in small interruptions. Messages answered immediately, regardless of timing. Calls accepted during moments meant for focus. Requests agreed to before considering cost. You tell yourself responsiveness shows reliability. Others begin to assume it is permanent. Soon, your time belongs less to intention and more to interruption. Time has proven that what is always available is rarely protected. Consider the man who answers every notification within seconds. At first, he appears efficient, helpful, dedicated. But gradually, people stop asking whether it is a good moment. They assume access. Urgency becomes artificial. Their convenience replaces his priorities. When he finally delays a response, frustration appears immediately. Not because he failed, but because expectations were trained carefully over months of compliance. Respect grows where access requires consideration. There is a quiet authority in measured delay, not avoidance, not manipulation. Simply the refusal to abandon one responsibility to satisfy another instantly. When someone waits for your response, they begin to recognize that your attention has weight. Scarcity introduces value. Noise fades when presence is no longer guaranteed. Many fear this distance because they mistake boundaries for rejection. They imagine appearing arrogant, detached, difficult, so they compensate with excessive friendliness. They laugh longer, explain more, remain available even when exhausted. Approval remains intact. Energy disappears slowly, almost politely. Ask yourself why constant accessibility feels necessary. Often, it hides fear. Fear of being replaced, forgotten, misunderstood. The moment you are not immediately reachable, you imagine losing relevance. Yet the opposite often occurs. Others adjust their behavior upward when access is not automatic. Distance clarifies importance. Observe respected figures in any environment. They are rarely rushed by every voice around them. Conversations occur intentionally. Interruptions are filtered, not through aggression, but through structure. People prepare before approaching them because attention is not casually distributed. Accessibility also invites emotional overreach. Friends unload problems repeatedly because you always listen. Colleagues transfer responsibilities because you rarely refuse. Family members assume flexibility because you rarely insist on limits. None of this begins maliciously. It begins with your silence about what is acceptable. A boundary spoken calmly reshapes relationships faster than endless patience. Approachability remains essential. You listen fully when present. You engage without distraction, but presence has edges. When a conversation ends, it ends. It does. When work requires focus, availability narrows. Some will interpret this as change. They are correct. You are no longer offering fragments of yourself simply to remain agreeable. Respect appears the moment others realize access to you is intentional rather than guaranteed. The fifth principle, stop trying to be liked, be respected, reveals itself most clearly through silence. Many men fear silence because they associate it with weakness, awkwardness, or social failure. They rush to fill gaps in conversation, soften tension with humor, explain themselves before being questioned. Noise feels like control, yet silence often carries far greater authority. The man who speaks constantly competes for attention. The man who chooses when to speak directs it. Observe ordinary exchanges. Someone challenges your opinion. Instinct pushes you toward immediate defense. Words arrive quickly, layered with explanations meant to restore comfort. You want understanding now. But urgency exposes insecurity. When every statement demands instant clarification, others sense dependence on agreement. History has already tested another approach. Pause. Silence unsettles because it refuses to participate in emotional escalation. When someone interrupts and you simply look at them without irritation, the interruption loses momentum. When criticism arrives and you allow a moment before responding, the room adjusts itself around that stillness. People begin to examine their own words while waiting for yours. Silence is not absence. It is control. Many misunderstand this. They imagine silence as withdrawal or passive avoidance. True restraint is the opposite. You remain fully present. You listen completely. You observe tone, posture, intention. Instead of reacting, you gather information. Others reveal far more when they believe they must continue speaking to fill the space you leave open. Consider negotiations, arguments, even casual conversations among friends. The person who explains less often learns more. Others expose motives through repetition. They overcommit emotionally. They contradict themselves. Meanwhile, you conserve energy. Your eventual response arrives shaped by understanding rather than impulse. Likability fears uncomfortable pauses. Respect tolerates them. There is also a private discipline involved. Silence forces you to confront your own discomfort. The urge to defend ego rises quickly. Someone misunderstands you, and your mind begins constructing speeches. You imagine correcting every detail. Yet, not every misunderstanding requires repair. Some reactions belong entirely to the observer. Ask yourself how often you speak simply to prevent being judged incorrectly. When you resist that impulse, perception changes slowly. People lean forward when you begin speaking because your words no longer arrive automatically. Meetings grow quieter when you enter because others anticipate measured contribution rather than constant commentary. Even disagreement carries different weight when delivered after patience rather than speed. A single sentence spoken late can outweigh many spoken early. Silence also protects dignity during conflict. Raised voices invite participation. Accusations demand defense. But calm quietness disrupts escalation. Anger struggles to survive without reaction. Those expecting argument encounter composure instead. Some interpret this as indifference. Others recognize strength. Both responses confirm the same shift. Emotional access is no longer freely granted. In silence, you discover how little actually requires your response. The sixth truth: stop trying to be liked, be respected, becomes unavoidable the moment discomfort appears. Most men spend years avoiding it without realizing how much authority is lost in the process. Discomfort arrives as tension in conversation, disagreement in a room, a request you do not want to accept, or a moment when honesty risks approval. Instinct pushes toward relief. A joke, a compromise, a quick yes. Anything that restores ease. Relief feels like success. It often signals surrender. Likability survives by removing friction quickly. You smooth over awkward comments. You volunteer explanations nobody requested. You soften boundaries before they are tested. Others leave interactions feeling comfortable. You leave carrying quiet exhaustion you struggle to explain. Something inside recognizes that peace was purchased at your expense. Time has proven that avoidance trains expectation. People begin bringing you situations precisely because you absorb discomfort without resistance. Extra responsibility appears because you rarely refuse. Emotional burdens arrive because you rarely redirect them. You become dependable in ways that slowly erase autonomy. Discomfort reveals dependence on approval. Consider the moment someone reacts negatively to your boundary. Perhaps you decline an invitation. Perhaps you question a decision openly. The reaction is immediate: surprise, irritation. Silence heavy enough to notice. Many men panic here. They rush to repair tone, add explanation, offer compromise, before the boundary has even settled into the air. Why? Because rejection feels like failure. But discomfort does not mean you acted incorrectly. Often, it means expectation collided with reality. Others are adjusting to a version of you that no longer negotiates instinctively. That adjustment requires tension. If you remove it too quickly, nothing changes. Respect grows in the space where discomfort is allowed to exist without apology. There is a difference between cruelty and firmness. Cruelty seeks domination. Firmness accepts consequence. You remain calm. You listen. You do not escalate. But you also do not retreat simply because someone else dislikes limitation. Emotional reactions belong to those experiencing them. Ask yourself how often you correct yourself merely because someone frowned. Many relationships quietly rely on one person absorbing unease. The agreeable employee prevents conflict among colleagues. The accommodating friend maintains group harmony. The man who never refuses becomes the emotional stabilizer for everyone around him. Appreciation may appear occasionally. Respect rarely follows because sacrifice became predictable. One refusal delivered without anger resets perception faster than endless cooperation. Discomfort also exposes internal habits. You notice how quickly your mind searches for approval signals. A delayed reply feels threatening. A neutral expression feels hostile. Silence after disagreement feels unbearable. These reactions reveal how deeply validation has been linked to safety. Yet maturity demands separation between acceptance and self-direction. When you tolerate being briefly misunderstood, something unexpected happens. Conversations become clearer. Requests become more respectful. Some people distance themselves because ease disappeared. Others step closer because authenticity replaced performance. Both outcomes carry information. Discomfort does not destroy relationships, it filters them. And once you stop rescuing every interaction from tension, you begin to see how often approval depended on your willingness to abandon yourself first. The seventh principle, stop trying to be liked, be respected, reveals itself through refusal. Many men believe strength is measured by endurance alone. They accept more work, more responsibility, more emotional demands, believing resilience earns admiration. They pride themselves on handling everything quietly. Yet, endurance without refusal becomes invisibility. A man who never says no slowly disappears inside yes. Refusal feels dangerous because it interrupts expectation. Someone asks for help when you are already exhausted. A colleague assumes availability beyond agreement. A friend repeats the same request disguised as urgency. The immediate instinct is accommodation. You imagine disappointment. You imagine appearing selfish. So you accept again. Relief follows briefly. Conflict avoided. Harmony preserved. But others learn quickly, not through malice, but through repetition. They notice that persistence produces agreement. They recognize hesitation as weakness rather than consideration. Over time, requests arrive without hesitation because refusal has never existed as a possibility. Your generosity becomes infrastructure others rely upon without reflection. History has already demonstrated that boundaries define position more clearly than effort ever can. Refusal is often misunderstood as aggression. Raised voices, sharp tone, withdrawal. True refusal requires none of these. It is delivered calmly, without explanation, layered into apology. I won't be able to do that. Silence follows. No performance, no negotiation disguised as kindness. Why does this feel so difficult? Because refusal exposes fear of exclusion. Many men learned early that acceptance depended on usefulness. Being agreeable guaranteed belonging. Saying no threatens that arrangement. You worry relationships will weaken. Opportunities will vanish. Respect will transform into resentment. Sometimes it does. Some people prefer the version of you that never interrupted convenience. They interpret boundaries as betrayal because access changed. Their frustration feels personal. Yet it often reveals something else. Connection relied more on compliance than mutual regard. Refusal separates transaction from respect. Consider the workplace where one person accepts every additional task. Others appreciate him openly. Praise appears frequently, yet promotions pass him by. Decisions occur without consultation. Why? Cost. Because constant availability signaled lack of direction. Those who refused strategically demonstrated judgment about where effort belonged. Effort alone does not command authority. Selection does. Refusal also protects attention. Every agreement consumes time you cannot recover. Every unnecessary commitment fragments focus. When your energy becomes scattered across obligations chosen to avoid discomfort, nothing meaningful receives full presence. Others sense this fragmentation even if they cannot name it. Ask yourself when you last refused something simply because it did not align with your priorities. A calm refusal forces recalibration. People pause before asking again. Conversations change tone. Some will test the boundary repeatedly, not aggressively, but curiously. They want to know if firmness survives pressure. Each time you remain consistent, perception reorganizes quietly. Respect rarely arrives with applause. Often it appears as hesitation before interruption. Refusal is not rejection of others. It is recognition that agreement carries consequence. When every yes costs attention, dignity demands calculation. And once refusal becomes possible, likability loses its leverage because approval no longer determines direction. The eighth truth, stop trying to be liked, be respected, requires confronting a difficult contradiction. Kindness without standards is often interpreted as weakness. Many men resist this idea because they associate kindness with moral integrity. They believe patience, generosity, and understanding automatically produce admiration. They offer help quickly. They forgive repeatedly. They absorb careless behavior to preserve harmony. Intentions remain noble. Perception changes anyway. People do not measure kindness only by what you give. They observe what you tolerate. Consider the man who never reacts when interrupted, the friend who laughs when insulted lightly, the colleague who accepts blame to prevent conflict. Each action appears generous in isolation. Over time, however, repetition communicates something unintended. Others begin to assume correction will never come. Carelessness increases because consequence never arrives. Time has proven this pattern across every environment. Where standards disappear, respect follows closely behind. Kindness becomes costly when it removes accountability. You listen endlessly without asking for reciprocity. You forgive without acknowledgement. You assist without limitation. Gradually, your role shifts. You are no longer seen as generous. You become convenient. People approach not because they value judgment, but because they expect accommodation. Why does this happen? Because standards introduce risk. When kindness includes expectation, rejection becomes possible. Someone may disagree. Someone may leave. Many men avoid this outcome by lowering requirements entirely. They remain agreeable regardless of treatment, believing endurance will eventually inspire appreciation. It rarely does. Respect requires visible lines, not harshness, not coldness, simply clarity about what behavior remains acceptable in your presence. When a joke crosses into disrespect and you ignore it repeatedly, laughter teaches permission. When promises are broken without acknowledgement and you continue as before, silence teaches acceptance. Kindness without limits invites erosion. There is a moment in conversation when correction becomes necessary. Perhaps someone speaks dismissively. Perhaps responsibility is shifted unfairly toward you. Instinct encourages patience again. You hesitate, calculating tone, imagining escalation. Yet calm firmness often requires only a sentence delivered without emotion. That doesn't work for me. No accusation, no lecture, just recognition of a boundary. Some react defensively. They accuse you of changing, becoming difficult, less friendly. Their discomfort reveals how much they relied on unlimited tolerance. Others respond differently. They adjust immediately, not because they fear you, but because standards clarify expectations. A boundary spoken calmly protects kindness itself. True kindness requires strength because it refuses resentment. Endless accommodation eventually produces bitterness, hidden behind politeness. Conversations become heavier. Small requests irritate you disproportionately because exhaustion accumulated unnoticed. Standards prevent that corrosion before it begins. Ask yourself how often you confuse avoiding conflict with preserving peace. Peace without structure is temporary. It depends entirely on your willingness to absorb imbalance. When standards appear, relationships reorganize naturally. Some distance themselves because accountability arrived. Others grow closer because honesty replaced silent frustration. Respect emerges when kindness no longer requires self-erasure. The ninth principle, stop trying to be liked, be respected, becomes visible through reputation, not performance. Many men believe reputation is built through moments of excellence, a strong presentation, a generous favor, a decisive victory during conflict. They chase impressive gestures, hoping admiration will follow. Yet, reputation rarely forms around isolated actions. It forms around repetition others can predict. People trust patterns more than promises. Likability depends on mood. You are agreeable today, accommodating tomorrow, patient when energy allows. Others enjoy your presence, but they cannot anticipate your position because it changes according to circumstance. Respect develops differently. It grows when others understand where you stand before you speak. Time has proven that consistency carries more authority than charisma ever will. Consider the man who refuses gossip every time it appears. Not loudly, not self-righteously. He simply disengages. At first, others notice little. Conversations continue elsewhere. Months later, something changes. When serious discussion begins, his opinion carries weight because restraint has been observed repeatedly. Silence built credibility more effectively than argument. Reputation is the memory others keep when you leave the room. Many undermine this unknowingly. They enforce boundaries one day and abandon them the next. They refuse disrespect in private, but tolerate it publicly. They speak firmly under pressure, yet soften immediately when approval feels threatened. Each inconsistency teaches observers that standards are negotiable. Respect hesitates where unpredictability lives. Consistency does not require rigidity. Circumstances change. Compassion sometimes demands flexibility, but flexibility without principle appears as confusion. Others test limits repeatedly because they cannot determine whether firmness will remain tomorrow. Eventually, they stop measuring your reactions altogether. Ask yourself how often you compromise a standard simply to avoid explaining it again. Reputation also develops through absence. How you behave when no reward exists becomes visible indirectly. Deadlines met without supervision. Promises kept without reminder. Conversations handled without spectacle. People notice reliability slowly. They begin assigning responsibility differently because expectation replaced uncertainty. One action repeated quietly outweighs many performed loudly. There is discomfort in this process. Early consistency may produce resistance. Someone accustomed to interruption meets refusal. Someone expecting immediate compliance encounters delay. They question motive. 4. They wonder if attitude changed. In truth, clarity replaced improvisation. Likability seeks approval through adaptation. Reputation grows through stability. You do not announce standards. You live them long enough that explanation becomes unnecessary. Over time, others adjust behavior before interacting with you. Meetings begin on time because lateness receives calm acknowledgement. Agreements are honored because excuses receive little engagement, not through intimidation, but through predictability. A respected man becomes easier to work with precisely because his limits are known. Reputation also protects you when misunderstanding appears. One rumor struggles against years of observable conduct. One mistake does not redefine identity because pattern outweighs anomaly. Approval fluctuates constantly. Reputation accumulates quietly until it speaks on your behalf, even when you are absent. The 10th truth: stop trying to be liked, be respected, reaches its final tension when you learn to tolerate misunderstanding without correction. Many men exhaust themselves managing perception. They explain intentions before accusations form. They clarify tone before anyone asks. They chase accuracy in how others interpret them, believing respect depends on being seen correctly at all times. It does not. Likability survives through constant explanation. You repair every misinterpretation because silence feels dangerous. Someone assumes you are distant. You reassure them immediately. Someone calls you stubborn. You soften your position to appear reasonable. Someone questions your decision. You deliver long justifications, hoping agreement will restore comfort. Understanding becomes negotiation. History has already revealed something uncomfortable. People rarely remember explanations. They remember behavior repeated over time. When you rush to control perception, you teach others that pressure produces access. Doubt becomes a tool used against you. Every accusation demands response because you have trained expectation around defense. Respect grows when explanation becomes selective. Consider how often misunderstanding occurs in ordinary situations. You decline an invitation, and someone assumes arrogance. You remain quiet during conflict, and someone assumes indifference. You enforce a boundary, and someone interprets it as hostility. None of these reactions belong entirely to you. They arise from the observer's history, fears, and preferences. Yet, instinct demands correction. Why? Because being disliked feels like exclusion. Approval once guaranteed belonging. Silence threatens that arrangement. Many men sacrifice clarity simply to avoid temporary distance. They explain until firmness dissolves. Others learn that persistence produces accommodation once again. Misunderstanding tests independence. There is strength in allowing incomplete narratives to exist about you. Not deception, not manipulation, simply acceptance that perception cannot be fully controlled. When someone misreads your restraint as coldness and you resist defending yourself immediately, something unexpected happens. Those paying attention begin observing actions instead of listening to explanations. Time corrects what argument rarely can. This does not mean refusing dialogue when necessary. Genuine confusion deserves conversation. Relationships built on respect require honesty, but constant self-defense signals insecurity. When every criticism produces urgency, observers sense dependence on approval rather than confidence in direction. A man at peace with being misunderstood cannot be easily pressured. Notice respected figures in any environment. They are often described differently by different people. Some admire them, others dislike them intensely, and they do not chase consensus. They remain consistent long enough that reality clarifies intention without performance. Ask yourself, how much energy has been spent trying to manage opinions that change regardless of effort? Silence after accusation feels heavy at first. You imagine reputation collapsing instantly. Yet, calm continuity disrupts rumor faster than argument. When actions remain aligned with standards, observers recalibrate quietly. Those seeking drama lose momentum when response never arrives. Respect does not require universal approval. It requires the willingness to walk forward carrying disagreement without stopping to negotiate every interpretation left behind. If this message unsettled you, keep it close. Discomfort is often the first sign that something true has been recognized. Subscribe to Austere Mind if you value clarity over comfort and discipline over applause, not for motivation, but for perspective that endures when noise fades. Leave your reflection below. Not what others expect you to say, what you noticed about yourself while listening. And if this reached a man who is tired of negotiating his own dignity, share it with him quietly. Respect rarely spreads loudly.